All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Press Box. Joining me today is the Daily Line reporting team, Michael McDevitt from our city hall beat, and Cameron Cuccinello, our legislative reporter, covering all things state. We've had a busy week last week with the State of the Union, or sorry, excuse me, the State of the State, with Governor Pritzker's message about where we're at in his fiscal budget for 2027, and covering um, the city council meeting. Michael, we delved into a whole bunch of issues um, with hemp ordinances and zoning committee updates and whatnot. So we're going to dive right into it today. And kind of see how these issues played out. So, Michael, give us a little bit of a rundown as to what happened at the city council meeting last week.
Absolutely. Well, good morning, everybody. Last week, we're coming off of a big city council meeting. I think the top agenda item is that the council failed to override another historic veto by Mayor Johnson. This was a compromise ordinance that would have limited the sales of hemp-derived intoxicating products. Mayor Johnson didn't believe that it was an ordinance that did enough to protect small businesses that are law abiding from being impacted. So he vetoed it. This was like the second mayoral veto in 20 years. The mayor vetoed another ordinance about a year ago, and the council also failed to override that. So we got some discussion from council members before the ultimate vote was short to override, but yeah, it's in addition to that, we've got another um, we had another bite at trying to fill the permanent zoning chairmanship, which seemed like it was going to get a vote and then ultimately ended up not getting a vote. And we also had a couple of ordinances that passed as well as resolutions, including one to try to kick off the process of legalized video gambling in the city, another to allow some residential developments to exceed downtown transit served parking maximums, as well as a new law that will establish a licensure process for tobacco retailers that's similar to the liquor license process.
What about Daniel Espada's ordinance?
Well, yeah, Daniel Espada's ordinance would have set up this pilot program by which people could call the city's 311 service and report uh, cars, well, mostly commercial vehicles, which would have been the only thing subject to this, but report commercial vehicles in uh, bus lanes, bike lanes, as well as blocking crosswalk access. This is something that passed out of La Spada's Pedestrian Traffic Safety Committee, but by the time it got to the council, it failed overwhelmingly. And so this was something that he was taken surprised by and expressed to me and a couple of other reporters after the vote that he perhaps could have done a better job whipping votes for this, but he did not. I think he underestimated the extent to which some of the alders on the council, including some progressive allies,
Mm.
were worried about putting Chicago residents in positions where they would have to record evidence of parking infractions. There was talk of maybe someone would get out of one of these delivery vans with a gun if someone was trying to rat on them for parking in a bike lane. Laspada said that this stuff was overblown, but he had harsh words for the council and the mayor, saying that the defeat of his ordinance was proof that Mayor Johnson and the council were okay with the number of pedestrian and cyclist deaths in the city.
Strong words there. Well, jumping back to the hemp ordinance, maybe give us a quick little setup. I know we talked about this a little bit in our last press box, but did the mayor kind of expound upon his reasonings for his veto initially, and then what are, I know Alderman Quinn has kind of led the charge on this. What was his response?
The mayor's reasoning for the veto has seemed to stay consistent. all through the process of this thing getting proposed and passed, he said the same thing in um, vetoing the ordinance, that he had concerns that the city would be adequately able to enforce it through BACP or through the Department of Health, who may need to be testing products. There was a presumption of, or a rebuttable presumption in the hemp ordinance by which that would hopefully remove the need to test these products. But Mayor Johnson still thought that city resources were insufficient to properly enforce and regulate um, in accordance with the ordinance that was passed. He was also concerned that because it wipes out the legal sale of these hemp intoxicants at myriad small businesses, that the effect on so-called good actor hemp businesses that are self-regulating and are only selling to people over 21, for instance, and are taking other security measures and are selling products where they know a little bit more about what's in them. He was worried that they would be affected as well.
The There was certainly discussion before the vote panned out. Any interesting comments were made prior to the vote being taken?
Yeah, you actually had some. I think an interesting flip was um, Alderman Scott Wagasback, who voted for Alderman Quinn's hemp ordinance,
Mm.
but did not vote to override the veto. He said, to paraphrase and summarize his comments, he basically said that this is now on the mayor to propose through his allies a better version of what was passed, and that the continued dangers associated with hemp derived intoxicants, he said, is now on the mayor to solve, because the council has done its part, but the mayor has stepped in the way of that.
Have we seen his administration take any meaningful steps to addressing this issue, or has it been mostly just obstruction at this
You
point?
know, I will say another reason that the mayor vetoed the ordinance, another thing that he cited, was that there's ongoing um, there's ongoing regulatory um, decision making at the federal level that's happening. We may get, because the loophole that enabled a lot of these Delta 8 and similar products to be sold at gas stations and convenience stores, that's been closed and is being phased out. The federal government is expected to issue at some point this year new regulations for this stuff. The mayor wants to sort of wait to see and make sure that Chicago is not um, sort of misaligned with the federal government on this. To which Alderman Marty Quinn told me, it's very funny that the mayor, who is very outwardly distrustful of the current administration and current federal government, would defer to the federal government on a matter like this. But that being said,
Oh,
Don, to go to
interesting
your
point.
your other question, um, I don't know about the administration specifically working on a new version of this, but certainly you had some people who opposed the ban and these new restrictions, telling me that they're going to be working on an alternative. Specifically, Alderwoman Maria Hadden, she's a leader of the Progressive Caucus, was outspoken against this hemp ordinance when it was proposed, voted to override the veto, and told me yesterday that she is working with some people in the a coalition from the hemp industry to come up with a solution that everyone can be more amenable to.
Do we think we'll see another version this year?
It's possible. I think it's going to depend on the level to which some of the people that were pushing Alderman Quinn's ordinance are
Mm.
okay with a structure that taxes and regulates this stuff, because that is like one of the other components of this that is was not really addressed in the initial ordinance, is that if people remember from the 2025 budget cycle, in late 2024, there were proposals from Alderman Will Hall to try to tax and regulate this to bring in money. Um, the mayor initially in his 2026 budget proposal also put forward a hemp tax to try to bring in revenue. Then that was scrapped because of the new federal regulations that were anticipated. So they not only want to protect access to safe hemp products, intoxicating or otherwise, keep them out of the hands of minors, but they also want to, some people on the council want to find a way to increase the city's financial health from this.
Sure. And we do have a number of wards that are currently banning the sale of this product, right? And what's the
Yes.
count at right now? Is it, it's not half yet, I know
You're
that.
putting me on the spot. I think it might be like 11 right
That's what I
now.
was, somewhere there. Okay, very
It's
good.
something like that.
We'll appreciate that. We'll jump over to Cameron here to talk a little bit about the governor's budget address. Um, $56 billion budget framework, Cameron. What are we seeing new in terms of taxes and general comments around um, the budget address?
Yeah, so he gave his introduction, his introductory budget. This is mostly a preemptory framework. We'll see for sure some changes, but things typically largely stay the same. It's a minimal increase in comparison to his previous budgets. That's of course because the state is kind of dealing with more of a financial crunch this year. So just a 1.6% increase from last year's enacted budget. Most of that is in mandatory increased spending. So for pensions and education, without that, it is just a 0.5% higher than last year's budget. And yeah, it includes a new social media tax, something that people who follow Chicago politics will be more familiar with now.
Sure.
Yeah.
How was that received?
It was received, there's some questions. Obviously, we hear from our Republican leaders, quite often they raise concerns about any tax increases. They would prefer to see more, cuts to spending. There's concerns about how it will impact social media companies in the states. The legality of it is still a question. And so, yeah, there's some questions that, it's for all social media companies with more than 100,000 users in the state of Illinois. And the way that his tax is set up, his proposal is the more users you have in the state, the higher a tax you pay. So there are concerns that, it could drive companies away from the state is always something that gets raised. I don't know how likely that is,
Right.
but we will see how that all plays out.
Indeed. Well, we obviously saw, as you noted, 1.6% increase in the budget. A big part of that was, mandated for education. We obviously had heard the Illinois Federation of Teachers and the Chicago Teachers Union kind of beat that drum that it's not enough funding to support their needs and give us a little bit of like what's the latest on all of that. Obviously, there's lots of sides to this issue, and it's kind of a continuing issue from years past. But any significant updates to that?
Yeah, where we stand right now, our education will get a $305 million increase under the budget. It does not include a property tax relief program that was removed last year, with leaders saying that they needed to assess how effective the program actually was. So it is once again not in the governor's proposal. But yeah, the Illinois Federation of Teachers and the Chicago Teachers Union are saying that the state has not paid enough into education. They want schools to be fully funded as soon as 2030, and on the current track, that will just simply not happen. So they're saying that the state needs to up its annual payments, needs to fully fund tier one and tier two schools, which are the schools the furthest away from being adequately funded. And they also want all mandated spending to be also funded for the state. So that's transportation, special education, school lunches, things like that.
Wow. So I'm putting you a little bit on the spot here, but if that were to all be fulfilled, how big of an increase would we have seen from 1.6 to? We have any
It's
idea of how big of a budget that would have we would need to increase to meet their desires?
I'm not sure the annual amount. What I do know is that IFT and CTU say that the state owes schools $6 billion.
Okay,
So again, that's coming from the unions. But that's quite the number.
but the number absolutely, and that is just for this year, or is that for years past as well, like a backlog of bills?
It might be for a backlog of
Okay,
bills.
all right, very good. Well, another interesting topic that came out of the address was statewide zoning. I, when I saw the press releases coming out early that morning, it definitely raised eyebrows and made me wonder what was the intent here. can you kind of frame the issue and help us understand where the governor's coming at from this?
Yeah, his main reasoning for this law is that we need more houses. We have, a housing crisis in the country. Rents are going up, mortgages are going up, and the best way he views it to get those prices down is to up demand. There have been studies done that say that Illinois is behind on basically keeping up with the demand for housing by like 140,000 homes. So he wants to try to cut some of that red tape and get more housing up.
Well, this obviously is a an interesting approach to that issue. I got to imagine that local municipalities are going to have issue with this. Have we seen pushback or any significant comments out of the other side, or just others that are vested in this to come out? What about housing providers themselves? Have they commented on or made any significant comments on the record?
Yeah, from what I've seen, I think housing providers are kind of on board. Well, obviously these are just, initial proposals, so we will see things change as negotiations progress. But they also would like to get housing up. On the other side with the municipalities, this measure includes some provisions that would, in their eyes, impede on local control. Local zoning is a local issue. This does not take away their zoning ability. They still have full control over, how they zone a lot. But things like, prohibiting them from preventing multi-unit housing on certain lots, that's something that they don't like. So we've already heard from the Illinois Municipal League, which represents our municipalities in the state, and they say, this doesn't take into account that different parts of the states have different needs, and they don't like that it impedes on local control.
Okay. Well, I'll jump back to Michael Hill real quick, Michael, because we had some interesting dynamics play out in the City of Chicago Zoning Committee. Um, for over a year now, or maybe over 2 years, you tell me, we have been without a zoning chair for the city council zoning committee. Um, what happened this week or last week in the city council?
Well, you're right that for I think over 2 years, it's definitely roughly it's roughly half of Mayor Johnson's term. We have had at different points an interim zoning chair in Vice Chair Bennett Lawson. Um, just at the turn of the new year, Alderman Lawson declared an ultimatum that he would no longer hold zoning meetings until there was a permanent chair put in place, and he believed that that permanent chair should be him. Um, he did not call a January zoning meeting, and then at that council meeting, he introduced a resolution to make himself the chair with two vice chairs, Alderwoman Ruth Cruz and uh, Alderman Walter Red Burnett. Uh, then he called a zoning meeting for this month, which was unexpected, but it seemed to indicate that we were maybe moving toward a resolution. He put a Rule 41 on the agenda at the February City Council meeting last week, indicating that he intended to call for a vote on that resolution to dub himself the zoning chair permanently. Mayor Johnson has praised Alderman Lawson's work as interim chair, and yet he stopped short of fully endorsing him for the role. Um,
Hmm.
and both with the mayor's explanation for this and sort of the broader political reasons that are at play is that these coveted positions of committee chairmanships are there's um, among the council there's a desire to have both the Black and Latino caucuses equitably represented among the committee leadership, and putting someone like Bennett Lawson in would, especially when we previously had not just a Latino member of the council in former Alderman Carlos Ramirez Rosa, we also had former Alderman Burnett um, as the zoning chair last year. So there's been discussions. In fact, when this all came to a head during council last week, you saw there was a 30-minute recess, 30-plus-minute recess, in which the members of the Latino caucus and the Black Aldermanic caucus went to different rooms to discuss about who was going to get their support, whether it be Lawson, whether it be, for instance, Alderman Gil Villegas, who is, a member of the Latino caucus who has expressed interest in the zoning position. After 30 minutes, there was no resolution to this debacle, and Alderman Lawson called off the vote. So we do not have a permanent zoning chair. In the wake of that, I've been able to talk to some of the key players. I spoke with Alderman Andre Vasquez, for instance, who is in the unique position of co-leading both the Progressive Caucus as well as the Latino Caucus. And what he told me is that there is the racial parity at play here, in that that there's members of the council that want to ensure that there's an equitable racial representation among committee leadership. But he said there was also concerns that he heard about the idea of putting 3 freshman aldermen in charge as chair and 2 vice chairs of the zoning committee. Now, someone could easily debunk this argument by saying that Alderman Lawson served on the development side of Alderman Tom Tunney's office, and has also been effectively serving as chair for about 2 years anyway. And so the idea that Lawson is a novice here may not hold a lot of water among people.
Sure.
Ultimately, what Vasquez told me is that he effectively does not care about the seniority of the person who occupies this post, and he just wants the person who is best for the city, whoever the council can come up with a consensus on. But the council and the mayor has somewhat stepped back from this role at this point, in terms of choosing who it should be. And one could argue, would he have power at this point to name his preferred pick, considering other preferred picks in the past have not come to fruition, like Alderman Cicho Lopez, who he tried to install about 2 years ago. So this is a real sort of this is potentially a perilous time for the council's growing independence. The council has been trying to flex itself more as an independent legislative branch for the past couple of years, especially with how politically weak Mayor Johnson has been, throughout his term. This is, potentially a time to sort of like demonstrate that, and they've not met the moment. They can't. This has been going on, and it appears to not have an end in sight. I've sort of fished for other people's names that could be out there, and it doesn't appear that there's a lot. I've heard Villegas, and I haven't heard other people. So I'm not sure exactly where this ends up, but in terms of the council needing to prove that it can make decisions and conduct its own business without the mayor involved, it's not a good showing.
Wow, that's a lot of dynamics playing out there, and really, there's no solution in sight here. It seems like we're at a standstill with this. Has Alderman Bennett Lawson made any comment as to whether he'll hold a meeting next month?
It's currently unknown. I wasn't able to get an answer yesterday. I simply received a sort of a generic statement about reiterating his desire to see this resolved, and that he believes that this is a position that he has shown that he can do, and that he deserves to continue as the permanent chair. He's got a few weeks to decide. I don't know when the actual deadline is, but if he wants to get everything on the agenda, he's probably got a couple of weeks to decide if he wants to hold a zoning meeting ahead of the March 18th city council meeting.
Sure.
So, we've got a little bit of time, but not a ton of time.
Well, there
so it's
was
unknown.
quite a lot of development from this last meeting too. I mean, it wasn't granted there was maybe another month's backlog, but a lot happened in this past month on the zoning committee related to Foundry Park, and I know an interesting development with downtown parking, which may kind of be counter to what the governor was looking for. Any comments on some of those developments?
Yeah, I'm curious to see how this ordinance that you refer to is received, because in effect what it does is that for parts of downtown it allows certain housing developments with aldermanic consent to exceed the parking maximums that are set near public transit locations like Metro CTA. The point of this is that, for instance, you might have a condominium building where it's downtown, and because it's near transit and has its own parking maximums attached to it, it may be able to do at most one parking space per housing unit.
Right.
With condominiums, you might have families, you might have new couples living in there, and they might need two parking spots per unit. That is basically, as I understand it, not legally feasible under the current code near transit. So this was met with a little bit of skepticism in zoning committee. You had someone like Alderman Daniel Espada, who is big into reducing parking minimums and reducing car infrastructure and promoting more active means of transit, more public transit, expressed skepticism about this, but that was countered by the proponents of this. You had Alderman Red Burnett as well as Alderman Bill Conway talk about how this was for very narrow cases in which you have a building that is going to be served by having two spaces per housing unit, for instance, and that this would not be used in every case, even when it applied. So again, though, it does sort of undermine the purpose of the transit served development, which is to build large scale developments that don't need the amount of parking that you typically may need. So once
Sure.
it's implemented, we'll see. Once use cases come to bear, yeah, we will see if there's any tweaking in the future here.
Cameron, how does that stand in line with what the governor has kind of laid out?
Yeah, so part of the governor's proposal kind of does the opposite of that. For some of that middle housing condominiums and the such, he wants to get rid of minimum parking requirements. He says, if you're near a transit station, you might not need even one unit per or one parking spot per unit. And he says, that adds extra costs to developments. It takes up space sometimes, where you could potentially, extend the building, add another building. So, he
Sure.
wants to kind of do the opposite of that.
And I would also add that the thing that's supposed to be a counterweight to this ordinance is that for every additional parking spot that's added to a building under this, they must pay a certain amount of fees to
Right.
the city's affordable housing fund or to its adopt a landmark fund. That is intended to sort of allow the market to still meet the demand that it says it has, while also still trying to create and generate funds for affordable housing. Specifically, we've got the Affordable Housing Opportunity Fund, which doesn't have a lot of permanent sources of funding. So this is intended to create that.
Okay. Interesting. Well, I'm going to jump back to Cameron to talk about some of the other legislative proposals that kind of came out of the governor's address. Um, Rising electricity costs, big topic, kind of an existing topic that we've been dealing with for a number of years. What kind of action do you think we're going to see on it this session?
Yeah, so something that the governor has already done is sign an executive order that is intended to start the process of building new nuclear power plants in the state. During the fall veto session, the General Assembly passed legislation to lift the state's longstanding moratorium on new plants. The state gets a lot of its electricity from nuclear. So this executive order kind of it creates it sets the process in motion for state agencies to create a new regulatory framework to try to maybe cut down on some of the time it takes to actually get things started, while of course preserving safety and all of that. The hope is to begin construction on a new plant by 2033. So they're also going to be starting the process of talking with companies who might want to build a plant here, and also reaching out to communities in the state who might want to be the host of a new plant. The governor also is proposing, as part of his budget, a 2-year pause on data center tax credits. Data centers have kind of been in the news a lot. They are high consumers of energy, so a lot of communities have felt, they don't think it's fair for them to be paying higher electric bills. There's been some discussion around legislation to have data centers pay kind of a higher portion of the bill as they are increasing demand. So we will see if that legislation still goes through. I don't believe the governor has voiced his support or opposition to that yet. Neither have, I don't think, any legislative leaders. So we will see where that bill goes. And yeah, it's part of the budget. So we will also see if that pause remains in the budget.
Interesting. Kind of just circling the whole taxation around social media and the infrastructure to utilize it effectively. So no official projects in sight for where a new nuclear power plant can go, or any specific use cases for any manufacturing or a data center specific site. Nothing of that has come to bear yet, right?
Not at this point, yeah. The Illinois Power Agency and the Illinois Commerce Commission have 60 days from when he signed the executive order on last Wednesday to get out notices of intent
Okay.
to, I believe, both the businesses and the communities to get that process rolling.
Any opposition to this?
There's the environmental groups had expressed some concerns about nuclear energy. This was dating all the way back to when they were negotiating this bill to that included lifting the moratorium. They would like to see more money and more time going towards things like solar, battery storage, and wind instead of nuclear.
Yeah, I mean it's been quite of a flip-flop, and maybe flip-flop's not the perfect term there, but we had a moratorium put in place not too long ago, and now that's lifted, and now we have almost a moratorium on tax credits to support that developing technology. Uh, any comments on the evolution of the governor's stance on these topics to kind of just help us frame, maybe what we're going to see over the next 5, 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen the governor talk a lot lately about just the need to increase supply. That's kind of, Illinois has a strong grid. Again, most of it, more than half of it, comes from nuclear energy. Um, but as prices have increased, as data centers get added on and other, just high just residents are using more energy. Um, he said, we need to up that generation. So I think, that the 2-year pause on the data center tax credits, kind of gives them some time to assess the tax credit, assess, the centers, their effect on the state's grid. And then yeah, getting that nuclear process rolling to try to get that demand up or that supply up.
All right, very good. Well, in a moment here, I'll ask you what are we looking at down the line in the coming legislative sessions that we're about to have. But anything else out of the governor's address that is worthy of highlighting?
Yeah, I think just some other proposals. He again talked about the homeowners insurance bill. That's
Yeah.
the one that would add some more regulatory oversight from the state over homeowners insurance companies. The bill passed the Senate in veto session, did not pass the House. So he kind of directly asked the House of Representatives. Most of the members were in the room when he did this to ask them to please pass that piece of legislation.
Yeah, and there's definitely been some opposition to this piece of legislation from the insurance associations. What is their pushback? And
Yeah.
help us frame it a little bit there.
Their main pushback is they say, Illinois is a state that we have like 1,000+ companies that offer homeowners insurance. And so they say, the market regulates itself. And that adding these extra levels of oversight of, state influence could potentially get companies to leave and not offer homeowners insurance here, which then gets rid of that competition, which they say will just ultimately kind of go against the point that the state is trying to make here.
Has this happened in any other states that they're pointing to say, hey, this doesn't dovetail?
Yeah, they think there was some talk about California. They have kind of a approval process for major homeowners insurance rate hikes. And so yeah, they kind of pointed there to say, some companies, did leave. I'm not sure the exact number of what the state had before or after the legislation passed, but they say that yeah, there was some companies that pulled out.
Okay. I wonder if those companies have pulled out though just due to the fires that are continuously happening there, and not necessarily because of increased cost and competition. But more to see as that plays out. Thank you, Cameron. What are we looking at in the coming weeks?
Yeah, so coming weeks, the Senate will be in session for the next couple weeks. The House of Representatives is actually in this week, and then they will not be in until after the midterm election. So kind of a little pause of action from them. But yeah, we're obviously watching for any Bears related legislation after Indiana moved theirs forward. The Indiana legislature will adjourn before the House of Representatives actually returns to Springfield after this week. So we will see if the state tries to push something through to answer Indiana's, or if they will just kind of leave it be. They after the initial sort of panic about the Bears potentially having made a decision to leave Indiana, it's been clarified that that was not the case. That both Arlington Heights and Indiana are still options.
Absolutely. Well, I did see I think it was a direct quote from the governor that the Bears will not be in Chicago. Is that set in stone?
It sounds like that's, they've kind of danced around that a little bit. But it sounds, that's the Bears, they want more space. Soldier Field, the site just does not have that kind of space to offer. They want their parking lots for tailgating. They want, to expand. They want to add hotels and restaurants and all that. And they can't do that in the city of Chicago right now.
Wow, that's that's tough to swallow. Michael, is this just another example of the mayor being weak on issues and unable to bring a victory home here?
I mean, I would say, ironically, the mayor has been someone who has pushed for taxpayer subsidies to
Yeah.
a new Bears stadium. So this might be an issue in which he was sort of a little bit ahead, or a little bit more willing to give them what they were wanting than other politicians.
Well, well, looking into the next couple of weeks here, what do we see coming through the committee schedule, as well as pending for potential vote at next month's city council meeting?
I think what I'm still waiting to see is this ordinance that would give the civilian office of police accountability, um, the power to investigate violations of Chicago's sanctuary city ordinance. That's the ordinance that basically prohibits cooperation with ICE from not just CPD, but all city departments, except in very, very limited cases. Um, that was deferred and published. At this past city council meeting. That's basically just a procedural move that punts it to the next regular meeting, or the two regular meetings from now. But it can be called back once. And I talked to Alderwoman Silvana Tavares about why she punted this, and she basically is worried about that ordinance being used to bring frivolous cases against the police, and potentially increase the city's legal liability. So we'll see. It passed out of a joint committee pretty unanimously, and but it'll remain to be seen if sort of like some of the more conservative people on the council end up opposing this, and whether that will be substantial enough to make a difference. But I expect that to come up as soon as next month. Additionally, I think what I'm going to be looking to in the near future is the work of these various working groups that were established. There's some it is under the banner of budget accountability. This is formed by the Alternative Budget Caucus, the group of council members that passed and crafted the 2026 budget that was adopted without the mayor's signature. And a few weeks ago, they unveiled the a number of working groups that'll all be led by a different alderperson into different topic areas with the express goal of ensuring that the administration carries out the alternative budget as adopted. There's areas like the advertising pilots for city property that were in here. There's insurance or assurances about video gambling, like legalization. There's assurances about revenue from the new liquor tax structure for off-premise consumption. And one of the ways in which there's already been sort of a start to this work is the passage just this past week of resolution to formally notify the state about the city's legalization of video gambling. That's intended to ideally kickstart the process to allow businesses to begin applying for licenses. Once they get their state licenses, they can get city licenses. But it's unknown whether or not this resolution will be sufficient to kickstart the process. People just people seem unsure about this just from what I've heard. And but if it is, there's still a question of how much of a backlog there will be at the state to even get these licenses issued and get these businesses up and running in order to make the about $6.8 million that's needed to as a component to balance this year's budget. So, but this budget coalition is seeking to monitor and keep in touch and coordinate with departments to ensure that as much is being done as possible to carry out the various facets of this budget. And they say they're doing it because they don't trust that the mayor's office is going to cooperate and ensure that they're trying their best to get it done.
Well, that is definitely a comment that I've been hearing quite often lately, is just the confidence that the budget that has been passed is going to get implemented effectively and responsibly. So undoubtedly, we will be covering all of these topics over the next month or so. So by the time we come back for our next episode of the Press Box, we'll have hopefully some answers, or at least some comments on the evolution of these issues. Cameron, Michael, thank you again for joining me this morning for this latest episode. We'll be back likely after the primary with our next episode. So we'll have some interesting topics to see how some of those races have played out as well. If for those listening, if you're not following us on X, Cameron, what's the handle to reach you at?
It is my name, Cameron Cutinello, CamRynCutinello.
All right, and Michael?
Mine is Mike McD Tweets, because I made it before the regime change.
Excellent. Well, you can also find us at the Daily Line Shy and the Daily Line IL on X, and also on Twitter, or excuse me, on LinkedIn as well. So find us on those. And if you are not subscribing to our morning newsletter, we do offer a free review that comes at you each morning at 6:45 a.m., packed with all sorts of original reporting and other news from around the media. So you can find that at thedailyline.com. Alrighty, everybody. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you.
Bye now.